Good morning, everyone. In this video, we will be discussing about the Module 23, which is the Analyzing and Interpreting Test course. Today, we will discuss two important processes regarding tests. This lesson is concerned with the task of analyzing and improving classroom tests, a procedure of test analysis, concepts of item difficulty and discrimination, and also the interpretation of scores. So first, let's have the analyzing test items. There are two main parts of item analysis. First is an examination of the difficulty level of items. Second is the calculation of the discrimination index of each item. So item analysis, it is the measure of an item's ability to discriminate between those who scored high on the total test and those who scored low. So conducting an item analysis depends upon whether the test is a norm reference or criterion reference, and it also depends whether the teacher has help during the procedure from either students or a computer. So this procedure uses the show of hands approach. So this index summarizes information as to whether students who are knowledgeable in the subject matter of the test answered an item correctly or more often than students who did not know the subject matter. Next is the classroom procedure for conducting item analysis. So conducting an item analysis depends upon whether the test is a norm reference or criterion reference, and it also depends whether the teacher has help during the procedure from either students or a computer. So this procedure uses the show of hands approach, in which students raise their hands to show their votes. There are two other steps that are necessary to prepare the item analysis information for practical use. First is the teacher should add the H and L values for each item to get an impression of their difficulty levels. Second, the discrimination index of each item is calculated by subtracting L from H and dividing by 1/2 the number of student papers used in the analysis. Next is the interpreting difficulty index. The difficulty of a task is dependent on the average difficulty of the items. If a task contains items all having high p-values, then the average of the total scores for the class will also be high. The difficulty level of items in a norm reference test should vary depending upon the purpose of the text. A high p-value for an item may not necessarily mean that the students know the subject matter of the item. However, items with low p-values might be hard for several reasons. Item difficulty helps us to know the degree to which students get answers correctly. A high percentage indicates an easy item or questions, and a low percentage indicates difficulty, or simply the higher the value, the easier the question. It should be kept in mind that the difficulty index for items is not an absolute value, but is indicative only of the relative difficulty of the item with a particular group of students at a particular point in time. A somewhat different group of students or the same students several weeks earlier or later may have responded to the item quite differently. It should be kept in mind that the difficulty index for items is not an absolute value, but is indicative only of the relative difficulty of the item with a particular group of students at a particular point in time. A somewhat different group of students or the same students several weeks earlier or later may have responded to the item quite differently. In statistical terms, this difficulty index is sample dependent.
Interpreting discrimination indices. In norm reference measurement, the purpose of a test is to measure individual differences within a class. In such tests, the discrimination indices should all positive and as high as possible. There are two ways to study discrimination indices of items. Calculate the H minus the L values of the items. That is, subtract the number of students in the low group that the item from the number in the high group who did so. A second approach is to actually calculate the discrimination indices using a formula. Then use the H minus L values and interpret the indices according to the following criteria. In the module below, you can find there the formula on how to calculate the discrimination indices. A high positive discrimination index suggests that the item is measuring the same general factors that the test as a whole is measuring. While a low discrimination index does not necessarily indicate that the item is defective, however, for example, if an item is measuring an important content area that is considerably different from the majority of the item. Of course, an item with a large negative discrimination index should be checked to make sure it was not keyed incorrectly or does not have more than one correct answer.
Interpreting test results. In order to interpret test scores properly, you need to understand the scoring system used. So, there are three types of scores. First, row score. This refers to the adjusted score on the test. Usually, the row score represents the number of items answered correctly. The second type is standard score. Standard score indicate where a person's score lies in comparison to a reference group. The third is percentile score. It referred to the converted to a number indicating the percent of people in the reference group who scored below the test taker. Interpreting test results start first with the determination of each individual's raw score. That is the number of right answers obtained on the test. For example, having no other information, what can be said about Anne's raw score of 37? These scores must be set in terms of either a criterion reference or norm reference framework to have meaning. So raw scores are uninterpretable. A score obtained from a criterion reference test is interpreted in terms of individual status concerning a well-defined instructional objective. Scores from teacher-made tests and other norm-reference tests are interpreted after first converting raw scores into other derived scores such as standard or percentile ranks.
So how are test scores commonly misinterpreted? So in the first bullet, teachers may misinterpret test scores by assuming that high scores indicate good instructions. So sometimes teachers often misinterpret scores because some of the students understands the lessons well and studied a certain topic even the teachers was not that effective. And then second, high scores can result that is too easy from only measuring simple instructional objective. In this case, it is truly indeed that tests with high score or most of the students get high scores because of the teaching is effective towards the learners and that helps them to understand it well. So how can we do that to lessen the likelihood and misinterpreting test scores? So there are three bullets theories. And the first one, avoid interpreting small differences. So teachers must give equal opportunities and equal access to them as learners. And second, assign final grade based on more than one or two exams. Teachers must show pleasant to its students so that they will impact the relationship as well. Third is avoid comparing test scores in more than exam. By doing that, students may feel bad and so it will affect its emotion. Another, refrain from using grades practices. An effective grading system fosters communications and so grade must be reflect on non-judgmental posture. And then, how can we use the test results to improve? So first, return the corrected test to the student. So of course, so that they will learn from their mistake. And second, give regular quizzes to help students keep on reading. In that way, students will learn to be actively engaged in the discussion. Third, allow retake tests or of earlier tests. For the reason students will be mindful and study well. And then look at the subject scores and its item analysis. So, identify the areas students may need to help. By this way, you can help students and able to help them to manage their difficulty. And then, encourage students to improve so that the students will be motivated and be uplift to their works. Another one, provide a short questionnaires at the end of the test about the course or program. For that, teachers know the students' difficulty and help them with it. And lastly, review item from the previous units so that we can avoid repetition and confusions of the unity. So, the checklist for effective tests. So these are follows. The task development. The task should be development process to be able for them to acquire what they've learned. And second, task preparation and administration. So preparation so that at the end there will be no more crack or misunderstanding. Third, task evaluation. So evaluate the task if it's relevant to their learning too. And lastly, test grading and scoring. So equally grade them and follow the instructions. So that ends our discussions in analyzing and interpreting test scores. So hope you learned and thank you so much for listening.